Good afternoon. My name is Caitlin Green, and this is my vlog for lecture that we had on Tuesday, September 7th, 2021. In yesterday's lecture, we went over basically the last bit of chapter 2 and really did a little bit of quiz prep for the quiz that was due today. You did answer my question that I had regarding kurtosis and skewedness. You explained that skewedness showed the shape of the distribution, and as if it was normally skewed, or if it was just a normal distribution, or if it was positively skewed in one direction or negatively skewed in the other. You also explained a little bit better what kurtosis was, and you explained that it was the peakedness of a graph. And while I was still a little bit confused about it during lecture, you told me that there was no need to be really an expert in kurtosis, just because typically you'll use like software and technology found on, say, Microsoft products in order to find what the kurtosis is of a graph. So while you can eyeball it sometimes, typically a program will actually tell you what the actual kurtosis is. Throughout the rest of it, everything was pretty much review. I had really no problem with the histograms while doing the notes, nor did I have a problem with the polygon frequency charts or polygon graphs, just because, well, it clicked in my head, and both graphs follow the same premises, and that you have the midpoint on the x-axis and the frequency on the y-axis, and as long as you get the base set up, really everything else is pretty much straightforward. However, the histograms will have bars that touch, and the frequency polygon will actually be a bit more like a line graph. One of the graphs that I did not remember going over in our notes, though, was the CRF ogive, I believe you pronounced it. That was the graph that constantly increased from 0 to 100. And I did not remember going over that I know that it was in the textbook, but I don't remember it being a part of any of the textbook problems or the lab problems, so that was a little bit confusing for me yesterday, but once you explain the basics of it, it really wasn't too hard. It's set up pretty much the same way as the other two graphs are. However, on the y-axis you'll have the CRF, and then on the x-axis you will have the upper real limits of all the values instead of the midpoint. And on those graphs you have to start with a upper real limit below the stated number. So ours was 19 or 119.5, and so we then had to put 109.5 as our lower limit so we could have a tie down at 0. And this graph always increases, like I said previously, and it always ends at 100%, which is one URL above what the data was. And so after that, I mean, it was pretty straightforward in terms of how it was, set up and what it looked like. The biggest thing for me was just realizing what all the values were and how it was similar and different to the histogram and frequency polygon graph. After that, we just went over the rest of the questions. We went over what percentiles were, and I really didn't have any problems with percentiles beforehand, just because I did the textbook problems, I believe, on this past Friday, and the percentiles were a little bit confusing to me just because it was a little bit difficult to find out what each value was in terms of, say, like B is like a CRF below the critical class, and K was the percent of scores in the critical class or the relative frequency. So all of those different aspects were a little bit confusing to me, but after working out the textbook problems myself, as well as looking at the textbook solutions on D2L, it really wasn't too difficult for me to figure out in terms of how to take X values into percentiles, and then how to find out what X value corresponds with what percentile. So those are my thoughts, concerns, and questions with this past lecture. Like I said, you did answer my question over kurtosis and reassured me that it really wasn't that big of a deal if I was, 100% confidence in kurtosis or not. It's just because most softwares will be able to tell you what the kurtosis is much easier than I could eyeball it. After that, we went over the new CRF ogive graph. That really wasn't new, but I guess I had missed it in the notes. And then finally, we went over percentiles. And like I said before, those really weren't too difficult for me. So overall, I thought this PAX lecture was a really good quiz review, and it helped me feel more confident about the quiz that I took last night. Thank you and have a good day.